Minecraft's new cave generator is finally here, and it brings perhaps the biggest change ever to one of the game's oldest environments, the Underground. With this update, Minecraft's world height is getting an upgrade. We're getting 64 new blocks at the top of the world and 64 blocks beneath for a total increase of 128 blocks, about 50% bigger. It's an exciting time to be playing the game and great to watch such a big change unfold before our eyes. The very face of Minecraft will change after this update, so it's important the caving changes are done as well as they can be. It's off to a good start, but there's definitely some feedback that we as the player base can offer to help nudge things in the right direction. So subscribe if you like what you see. I will be your host, I'm Simply Sark, and today we're going to go over some tweaks that could be made for the cave part of the Caves and Cliffs update. I'd just like to acknowledge that this is the very first iteration of the new cave generator, and it wouldn't be fair to judge it as anything but that. There are probably all sorts of changes in the pipeline, and everything I'm saying today will try to stay fairly general rather than focus too much on what are obviously products of early prototyping. What I immediately noticed when I first started playing around in the snapshot was how deep these caves are. Up to this point, we had about 50 or so blocks worth of space to fit all the caves into, but this number is probably now closer to 110. In spectator mode, you can really see just how much further down they go, and it's such an awesome sight to see. Let's start with what I think is a pretty big issue here. The lighting. These caves are so dark. Even with brightness turned to max, it's hard to even make out much of what's going on. Now, there are some things we know are going to help try and alleviate this. For example, lichen is a new plant that gives off a low light level to help you see a little better. If these were placed on literally every flat surface, so all stone essentially glowed, that'd help a lot, but this likely isn't going to be the case, and much of the underground is still plunged in complete darkness. I think what needs to happen here is darkness in general needs to be brightened up to the point where terrain isn't hard to distinguish, because that's the issue. This isn't unprecedented. With the ocean update, Mojang realised underwater gameplay was too murky, so they bumped those levels up so playing in water wasn't a miserable experience. Perhaps when you're specifically in cave darkness, the game could auto-adjust your vision to make it easier in the eyes. Some kind of brown or orange hue would also help set the mood. I just don't think using traditional light sources is going to solve this particular issue. This update has really highlighted a problem that we've tolerated for a long time, but with these new caves, enough's enough. This needs addressing. Granite and diorite are hideous. I know everyone knows this, but as much as these giant new caverns are great structurally, those diorite and granite veins completely and utterly ruin the aesthetic they're going for here. When they were added, it made sense. They needed a quick and dirty solution to add these new stones to the generator, and making them spawn as these random blobs in the stone was simple and didn't require major changes to world gen. In the old tight caves, this wasn't too offensive, but the true ugliness of diorite and granite have been laid bare. We can't hide them anymore. The time has come to deal with these eyesores. I think what would be so much better is instead of generating dozens of small clusters, they formed much larger local regions. On the other hand, the caves do need more than just one type of stone, otherwise it becomes quite monotone. So it'd be great to see new stone subtypes to diffuse the area a little. In the Nether, you sometimes see these basalt pillars, and I think a similar technique could be used to form these new pillars in the underground caverns. So like I said, the world height has been increased. 64 blocks on top, 64 blocks below. Now, while the increase is really noticeable in the caves, when I had a look up in the overworld, even though it's the exact same increase, to me it didn't really feel like all that much height had been gained. I think the reason here is the original space between water level and the height limit was already around 190 blocks, so those 64 new blocks don't look as significant when compared to the underground literally doubling in depth. I know this is cheeky me saying, and I know loads of you are going to hate me for even suggesting it, but if it were me, I'd not even bother with raising the sky height, just give it all to the caves. Let's be proper mad lads and triple their size instead. On the other hand, I understand mountains are getting updated too, and an extra 64 blocks does help if you actually want to build tall things in areas where there's not much space left in the sky. There's also the fact that adding empty air blocks is likely much less demanding than adding even more space that needs to be filled with things and processing power. I guess I'm just looking at all those caves and feeling a little bit greedy. Now, I've shown you via spectator mode how significantly deeper the underground now feels with the doubling of its depth, but while walking around, something I noticed was that I don't know if that depth is communicated quite as well from the perspective of a survival player in first person. The thing is, when you're right at the bottom of the world, you're actually quite far away from safety, and that's a really cool new feeling. Pre 1.17, even at lava level, it never felt like the surface was that far out of reach, and if you wanted to bail, just pillaring up was always an option. That is no longer the case. Getting back to the surface from Y-50 is much more of a trek than we're used to, but I think at the moment this environment is lacking various forms of feedback to really get across to the player how deep they currently are. There's loads of ways you could do this using things like block palette changes, audio, sound effects, music and more. This isn't to forget we're getting the deep dark, which is highly likely to appear at the very bottom of the world. This is a great example because the shift in block generation, atmosphere and inhabitants will immediately make it clear where you are on the Y level and how much rock is currently above your head. But we don't yet know if the deep dark is a biome that spawns everywhere or if it's just local pockets here and there. If it's not ever present between two Y levels, I think my point stands more true and it would be beneficial to have other forms of feedback to discern depth. Another thing that stood out to me in the new caves was that a lot of the older features don't carry over too well in a larger environment, specifically the dungeons. These square little boxes really are such a throwback to the Minecraft of yesteryear, and they work well enough in those tight, claustrophobic caves, but in these giant, spacious caverns, they just seem a little wimpy. The reason they were originally challenging is because in those close quarter situations, it's quite hard to put a meaningful distance between you and the mob, so you can quickly become overwhelmed. But in these huge spaces, it's almost like being back on the surface because there's so much room for activities that you can easily sprint away from the danger. There's also the fact that spawners kind of exist to make up for the lack of spawning areas, but with these new spaces, there's going to be so many mobs anyway that they kind of lose their initial purpose. Big caverns need big, imposing features to fill out the space. I think if the dungeons still want to remain relevant going forward, they're going to need some updates of their own to keep up with the huge strides the caves are making. This next one is probably the most important and probably would require the most effort to address. Even when they revealed the caves at Minecon, I could tell this was going to be an issue. The thing is, by introducing these massive new spaces, you start getting this problem with exposition. When you go spelunking, this is an adventure you're going on. You're experiencing a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. As you progress through your journey, more information is revealed to you. You learn what is past corners, you learn what is in chests you find, you learn the existence of things like mineshafts. There exists this veil of the unknown that only fades away gradually as you push forward. And the problem with these big caves is it kind of stunts this idea of slowly exposing the player to new information. In these huge spaces, everything is just there, sat out in the open. 100 mobs are just standing there. All the ore veins can be seen plainly. There's no story, it's just set pieces that exist to be interacted with, then rinse and repeat like a machine. You might be thinking, well, that's why it's so dark, because the pitch black makes it hard to see all these things. I don't think that's a good solution because it degrades the player experience. People want to marvel at these beautiful environments, that's why they were added. They don't want to be squinting at their screens because it's hard to make anything out. That's not really fun. I think the solution here is caving needs to adopt a new approach on rendering things. As I said, these caves need to be brightened up a little bit to make spelunking enjoyable, but at the same time control when it's time to reveal information to the player. Essentially, treat the environment and these set pieces like mobs and ores as two separate layers. The cavern itself should be rendered as is, though a little brighter, whereas the mobs and ores should have a much lower render distance. A zombie shouldn't be visible from 50 blocks away, only when you get within, say, 25. A block of diamond ore should just look like plain old stone from afar, but as you approach, it slowly reveals its true nature. This gives you the benefit of these large environments, but allows the game to tell the story at a much steadier pace. This also opens up a new pathway to assist the player. For example, perhaps ores could sparkle sometimes from within the darkness to give the player a hint that they're there and where they are. You could also do something similar with mobs where their silhouette momentarily blurs into existence. Maybe you could even bring the new spyglass into the mix. If you used the spyglass into the Dark Shroud, it could reveal exactly what's hiding in your line of sight. It'd cement this new tool as a must-have when going exploring. This isn't so much a tweak, but I just wanted to point out that we 100% need a grappling hook in Minecraft now. It never really made much sense before because there wasn't really anything to grapple onto, but looking at these new caves, I'm just left scratching my head wondering how I'm gonna get around this place. I mean, let's say I don't have an elytra, which I don't because I'm poor. It's gonna get old pretty quick, pillaring up and down trying to reach new ledges and mining the dozens of ores that are way too high to reach from the ground. To be honest, I just want an excuse to have a grappling hook. I mean, it doesn't have to be a grappling hook, but I do think this new geography has created new problems that didn't exist before around movement. An enderpearl can get you around, but the thing is, you kind of need to be able to latch onto walls and ceilings and stay still for a bit whilst you do your business. You could solve this in a few ways, and one of those ways is a grappling hook. Like I said here though, these caves are the very first iteration, and as the update progresses, I'm sure we'll start to see them get refined and given much more polish. These were just some things that stood out to me, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the new caves. What do you think these are going to mean for Minecraft? Do you like these new huge environments? And what might you do differently? Let me know. Either way, this is unfortunately all we have time for today. I really hope you enjoyed. These caves are looking good and it'll be fun to see how they progress. But guys, thank you very much for watching. I've been your host, I'm Simply Sark, and I will catch you in the next one.